At 34, I learned that the cruelest thing my mother could say fit into 8 words. I'd spent 6 years on fertility clinic waiting lists, 6 years of blood draws and hormone shots and phone calls that always ended the same way. Then I got pregnant. I stood at the family dinner table, 22 relatives around Diane Townsend's. Good China and I said the sentence I'd rehearsed in the car for 40 minutes. I'm pregnant. My mother set down her fork. Let's hope this one is smarter than you. My sister Megan laughed so hard she covered her mouth with her napkin. My father checked his watch. Can we eat now? I looked across the table at my husband Daniel. He nodded once. I reached into my coat pocket, unfolded a single sheet of paper and stood back up. It was a letter my doctor had written. 3 paragraphs, plain English, no medical jargon. By the 3rd sentence, my mother was crying. But here's what none of them expected. By the time I sat back down, every person at that table knew exactly who the real disappointment was. I work in healthcare data, not the glamorous kind. I don't hold stethoscopes or sign discharge papers. I sit in a windowless office on the 3rd floor of Ridgepoint Regional Hospital, and I read numbers until they confess what went wrong. Readmission spikes, billing anomalies, infection clusters buried in 3 years of intake forms. I'm the person who finds the 1 decimal everyone else scrolled past. The job requires patience, stubbornness, and a tolerance for being invisible. Those happen to be the 3 things the Townsend family raised me to be. My mother, Diane, taught 4th grade for 31 years. My sister Megan followed her into medicine and kept climbing OB/GYN, chief resident by 30, partner track by 35. My father, Roger, sold industrial valves, came home at 6, read the paper, and said nothing. Somewhere between Megan's white coat ceremony and my associate degree in applied statistics, the family quietly decided on our roles. Megan was the future. I was Tracy. When relatives asked what I did, my mother would wave her hand. She works with computers. Daniel was the first person who ever asked a follow-up question. We met at a hardware store. He was pricing cedar planks for a client's kitchen. I was buying shelf brackets for an apartment I couldn't really afford. He builds furniture, custom cabinetry mostly. He listens the way wood listens to a lathe, patiently, letting the shape come. He proposed on a Tuesday morning over cold cereal because, he said, he didn't want me to think love had to be a performance. We bought a small house near the river. He built the dining table himself. For 3 years, that table felt like enough, but I had no idea how bad it was about to get. The trying started quiet. Then it got loud in all the wrong ways. The first year was just calendar math and cheap drugstore tests. The second brought a referral. The third brought the first son, the specialist, the first needle, and the first time Daniel held my hand while a technician measured something inside me with a wand. I lost the first pregnancy at 9 weeks. I was at work. I felt it happen in my office chair, and I drove myself to the ER because I didn't want to bother anyone. That's who I was then, the woman who apologized for bleeding. The second loss came at 11 weeks, the third at 7. Each time the clinic used the same phrase, asterisk unexplained recurrent loss. Asterisk the first Y wrote it on a sticky note once and stared at it like a data set missing its key variable. I never told my family, not any of it. I told Daniel, obviously, and my friend Carla from billing, and the intake nurse who knew my name by the 4th visit. But I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell Megan. I definitely didn't tell Roger, because I knew exactly what they'd say. Diane would find a way to blame my diet, my job, my timing. Megan would tilt her head and use the word unfortunately in a sentence that also contained the word star your age. Asterisk, and Roger would check his watch, so I carried it alone. The appointments, the injections, the 6 a.m. blood draws that left bruises in the crook of my elbow. I hid under long sleeves at Sunday dinners. 6 years of swallowing grief like it was tap water. Then, during the 5th loss, my phone buzzed in the clinic waiting room. My mother. Asterisk, Tracy, your sister's being honored at the Medical Society dinner Friday. Be there and wear something appropriate. Asterisk, the phone face down on the clipboard. I was sitting in a waiting room after my 5th miscarriage, and my mother was worried about my dress code. That night I made a decision that would change everything. Perfectionism is a quiet disease. It looks like competence from the outside. It looks like a woman who has her life together, her budget color-coded, her pain filed alphabetically. But inside, it's just a person who believes that if she controls enough variables, the universe will ultimately cooperate. I controlled everything I could. I kept a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, procedure. Column C, cost. Column D, outcome. The outcome column was mostly one word. Asterisk negative. Asterisk I stopped crying at the results. I just updated the cell and booked the next appointment. When my mother finally called not to ask how I was, she never did that. She said I needed to stop. It's embarrassing, Tracy. Not heartbreaking, not difficult, embarrassing. Like a stain on a tablecloth she'd have to explain to company. Some women just aren't meant for it, she added, flat and final, the way she used to mark wrong answers in red pen. That's not a failure, it's just biology. I held the phone and let it land. That night I lay in bed and counted, not tiles, not breaths, the number of times in my adult life my mother had asked me a genuine question about my health. I got to 4. 3 were about a sinus infection. 1 was about a mole. 0 were about the 6 years I'd spent treeing. C, to become a mother. 0. And I realized then no one was coming to save me. I had to save myself. My regular OB referred me to a specialist named Dr. Renata Hale. She ran a recurrent loss clinic 2 floors below my own office. 53, direct, and with 0 interest in telling me to asterisk, just relax and try again. Asterisk, she pulled up my chart, looked at the 5 losses on my intake form, and said a sentence no one in my family ever had. This might not be your fault. She ordered a full genetic workup, karyotype analysis, the kind of testing that looks for the reason behind the reason, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Not hope, I'd beaten that out of myself. Curiosity, the same instinct that made me good at my job. Somewhere in my own blood there was a number everyone had missed, and I was going to find it. I told Megan about the workup during a phone call, casually, the way you mention a dentist appointment. Her answer was immediate. Tracy, stop playing doctor. I thought you're overthinking this. Sometimes these things just happen. She used her professional voice, the one she reserved for patients she'd already decided not to listen to. My body had been trying for 6 years. Megan had spent 8 years in medical school. She delivered other people's babies for a living. And not once had she suggested her own sister get tested for a chromosomal cause. She had the training. She had the access. She just didn't have the interest. So the spreadsheet girl went looking instead. When the results came back, Dr. Hale turned her monitor toward me. A diagram of chromosomes, mine, arranged in pairs. 2 of them had segments swapped. You carry a balanced reciprocal translocation, chromosomes 7 and 11. My chromosomes were rearranged but functional in my body. The problem only showed up during reproduction, creating embryos with too much or too little genetic material to survive. That was why I'd lost 5 pregnancies. Not stress, not my age, not 4. Speed or positive thinking. A microscopic rearrangement that had been there since before I was born. Then she added one more thing. This type of translocation is almost always inherited from a parent. I'd recommend testing both of yours. Asterisk, inherited from a parent. Asterisk, week by week, quietly, methodically, the data had been pointing somewhere and now it pointed home. I thought about a box I'd found when I was 8. Cedar, on the top shelf of the hallway closet behind the quilts. I had one hand on the lid when my mother appeared behind me and took it away so fast the edge scraped my knuckle. Asterisk, don't ever touch that. Asterisk, she didn't yell. That was what made it stick. Weeks later, helping her downsize the old house, I found the closet open and the box exactly where it had been 26 years before. She was running the faucet in the kitchen. This time, no one's hand stopped mine. Inside, a pale yellow knitted hat, small enough to fit in my palm. A hospital bracelet, yellowed but legible. E. Star Townsend, baby boy. November 3rd, 1991. Asterisk and a footprint card with a name in ballpoint. Caleb Townsend. Asterisk fathersified a brother. A brother who'd lived long enough to be measured and named and then didn't. Diane would have been 28. Megan was 3. I wasn't born yet, and no one had ever said his name. My Aunt Linda filled in the rest over coffee. Caleb was full term nearly. They said it was the cord. Your mother never believed that. And there were others before him too, maybe 3 early. Before Megan, she never carried them long enough to name. Linda set her mug down slowly. Your mother never grieved out loud, so she grieved you. I drove home and opened my laptop. The variable I'd been hunting for 6 years finally had a name. And the name was in that cedar box. My mother had carried the same rearrangement her entire life, her losses in the 80s, Caleb in 1991. The exact pattern Dr. Hale had described passed from mother to daughter to the next generation of grief. She'd watched me struggle for 6 years, and instead of "I understand" or "this happened to me too," she'd said some women just aren't meant for it. Asterisk, I could have been angry. The data supported anger, but anger is sloppy, it misfiles things, rounds numbers that need to be exact. So I opened a clean spreadsheet and drafted a timeline. Diane's losses, Caleb, my own, the translocation. Then I asked Dr. Hale for one more thing. I'd like you to write a letter for my family, the kind my mother would understand. 3 paragraphs. We started IVF with genetic screening the following month. Of 9 embryos, 3 came back normal. The second transfer took. At 14 weeks, Dr. Hale said the words I'd stopped believing I'd hear. "You're past the risk window. This pregnancy is progressing normally." I folded the letter into thirds and put it in my coat pocket. I knew every sentence by heart. They had no idea what was coming. I chose the dinner not because I wanted an audience. I'd spent my whole life avoiding one. I chose it because the people who decided I was worthless had done it in public, over meals, in front of relatives who nodded along. The label was built at family tables. It could be unmade at one. It was a double celebration: Diane's retirement, Megan's new partnership, the good china, ivory with a gold rim, white lilies, 22 guests, every seat assigned. Mine was between an uncle who wouldn't talk to me and a retired vice principal who wouldn't notice. Daniel sat across the table in the jacket he saved for funerals. Diane tapped her glass and toasted Megan. "We always knew you'd get there." The room applauded. That was the pattern: Megan at center stage, Tracy in the margins, dessert, small talk, the china back in the cabinet for 6 months. Except tonight, I had a coat on the back of my chair, a letter in the pocket, and a 26-week-old daughter who had never heard anyone call her mother dumb. Daniel caught my eye. He nodded. I put my napkin on the table. I stood up. 22 faces turned toward me, and I said the 2 words I'd waited 6 years to say. "I'm pregnant." The table went quiet, the real kind, where forks stop and you can hear the refrigerator hum. I looked at my mother. Her face did the thing I'd seen 1,000 times. The quick sort behind the eyes, filing me into asterisk inconvenience asterisk asterisk embarrassment asterisk or asterisk irrelevance asterisk. Asterisk, it took her less than 3 seconds. She picked up her wine glass. "Well, a sip. Let's hope this one is smarter than you." Megan put a hand over her mouth, not fast enough to hide the smile. "At least now she won't be the only disappointment in the family." She said it to Diane, not to me. Like I wasn't in the room. Like my child was already a punchline. Roger reached for the bread. "Can we eat now?" 22 relatives. Not one of them spoke. The room waited for me to fold myself back into the margins the way I always had. I looked at Daniel. His hands were still. He nodded. I didn't sit down. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the letter, soft at the folds from 11 weeks of carrying it. I pulled it out and unfolded it. "What is that?" My mother asked, the same sharp voice she'd used on the cedar box. "It's a letter," I said even. "From my doctor, a specialist in recurrent pregnancy loss." The word recurrent landed like a stone in a pond. Megan's smile disappeared. Roger put down the bread. "I spent 6 years trying to have a baby. I lost 5 pregnancies. I never told any of you, because I knew what you'd say." I looked at Diane. "I know what you just said. I'd like to read this now, all of it, and then I'll sit down." She opened her mouth. I held up one hand, the same hand she'd slapped off that box when I was 8. I read, "Asterisk, dear Tracy, your current pregnancy is healthy, viable, and progressing normally at 26 weeks. Your daughter is developing on schedule." I breathed. Asterisk, over the past 6 years, you experienced F. As I have pregnancy losses. After extensive testing, we identified the cause. You carry a balanced reciprocal translocation involving chromosomes 7 and 11, a structural rearrangement that does not affect your health but creates a high probability of unbalanced embryos. This is not a lifestyle factor. It is not caused by stress, diet, timing, or personal failure. It has been present in your DNA since birth. Asterisk, someone exhaled. I didn't look up. I read the 3rd paragraph. Asterisk, this type of translocation is inherited passed from parent to child. Given your family history, including documented losses in the previous generation, the clinical evidence strongly indicates you inherited this condition from your mother. Asterisk, I stopped. The sentence did what sentences do when they carry 35 years of silence. It sat in the middle of the room and waited for someone to look at it. Diane looked at it, and her face changed, not the recalibration, but something underneath. Something old, terrified, like wallpaper peeling back to show the plaster. Her eyes filled. Not the dignified tears she produced at church, the other kind. By the third sentence, my mother was crying. The table understood before she did. You could see it move through them, Linda first, then Paul, then the cousins. Asterisk passed from the mother. Asterisk, it meant Diane carried it. It meant her losses, the ones buried in a cedar box on a closet shelf, had the same invisible cause. It meant the woman who had spent 6 years calling her daughter a disappointment had passed down the very thing that made those pregnancies fail. You don't understand, Diane said, voice cracking. The name she hadn't spoken in 35 years stuck in her throat like a bone. Linda put a hand on her arm. Tell her, Diane, for once. Tell the truth. Megan sat frozen, the color gone from her face. 8 years of medical training, a career delivering other women's babies, and she had never once considered that. Her own sister's losses might have a cause she could have found in an afternoon. She hadn't asked. She hadn't looked. She'd laughed. Roger stared at his plate. For the first time in my memory, he didn't check his watch. I folded the letter 3 creases, the same as always, and put it back in my pocket. I didn't say asterisk, you gave this to me. Asterisk, why didn't say asterisk, you could have warned me. Asterisk, why didn't say Caleb. Asterisk, why didn't say any of the things a person says when they've earned the right to be cruel. Because cruelty was their language. It had never been mine. I looked at my mother and kept my voice level, the way I keep it when I'm reading numbers that don't lie. She doesn't have to be smart. She doesn't have to be the best. She just has to be loved. I put my napkin on the table. Daniel stood, walked around, pulled out my chair, and put his hand on the small of my back. We walked to the door. Behind us, Diane called my name. I heard it. I didn't turn around, not because I was angry, but because I had said everything the letter had to say. Everything after that was hers to carry. 3 weeks passed. Nobody called. Then Linda left a voicemail. Asterisk, you were right to say it, and I should have said it years ago. Your mother's not okay, but that's not your job. Asterisk, I saved it. Megan didn't call until day 23. Asterisk, can we talk? Asterisk, I waited 2 days and wrote back. Asterisk, when you're ready to be honest, yes. Asterisk, Diane sent a letter, 2 handwritten pages. The penmanship perfect because teachers don't send sloppy letters even when they're falling apart. Most of it was about her. How hard it had been to lose Caleb. How she had no language for grief in 1991. How she'd always been afraid I'd turn out like her. And how that fear had come out wrong. She didn't say sorry. Asterisk, but at the end she wrote, asterisk, the Fies would like to meet my granddaughter. When you're ready. Asterisk, Daniel read it. She's still making it about her. I know. I thought for a week, then wrote back 1 line. Asterisk, you can be in her life. But it starts with the truth. All of it, including Caleb's name. Asterisk, 11 days later, a single sentence came back. Asterisk, his name was Caleb James Townsend. Asterisk, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough. But it was the first honest thing my mother had written me in 34 years, and I decided that was a place to start. My daughter was born on a Tuesday in August. The nurse placed her on my chest, and she opened her eyes and looked at me with the unfocused curiosity of someone deciding whether to stay. Diane left the cedar box on my porch, no note, the brass latch polished for the first time in decades. Caleb's hat, his bracelet, his footprint card. I put it on the shelf in my daughter's room, not hidden, not behind quilts, just there where the light could reach it. I spent 34 years trying to be smart enough to earn a love that was never going to come on my terms. It turned out the smartest thing I ever did was stop trying to prove myself to people who decided my value before. I was born and just love her instead.